Officer Jenkins' harsh voice echoed through the courthouse hallway as he pulled Malcolm Rivers toward a small chamber. "Interfering with police duty," he barked, listing a string of exaggerated charges one after another. A crowd of bystanders gathered, their whispers filled with disbelief as they watched the scene unfold. Malcolm, his wrist restrained tightly, locked eyes with the onlookers. Despite his situation, his gaze was unwavering. There was an air of quiet defiance in him, a silent promise that he would not bow to this display of unwarranted power. Earlier that day, Malcolm had been walking toward the courthouse under the sweltering summer sun. But deep down, he knew that wasn't always the case. His parents had instilled in him a sense of justice and compassion that he carried with him every day of his life. With that small act of kindness behind him, Malcolm continued his journey to the courthouse. The grand building, with its towering white columns, loomed ahead like a monument to justice. Yet Malcolm couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. Over the years, he had seen far too many instances where justice seemed out of reach for people like him. Just as he reached the steps leading to the entrance, a heated argument caught his attention. Officer Jenkins, a broad-shouldered man with an authoritative air, was looming over a young black boy. The officer accused the boy of loitering near the courthouse steps, his voice sharp with irritation. Malcolm could see the fear in the boy's eyes as he stammered, trying to explain himself. Sensing the injustice unfolding, Malcolm approached calmly. "Excuse me, officer," he said in a steady voice. "Is there a problem here?" Jenkins glared at him, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Stay out of this, old man," he snapped. Malcolm didn't back down. "This is a public building, isn't it? The boy has every right to be here." Furious, Jenkins grabbed the boy's arm, but the commotion gave the teenager a chance to break free and escape. The officer turned his ire toward Malcolm. "You think you're clever? Let's see how clever you are in court." Without warning, Jenkins seized Malcolm's arm and marched him toward the courthouse entrance. A few bystanders gasped in shock, some shouting in protest, while others simply watched in stunned silence. Inside the courthouse, Jenkins stormed through the marble-floored lobby, his boots echoing loudly with every step. Malcolm followed closely, his arm still gripped tightly, enduring the stares of curious onlookers. Some recognized Jenkins' notorious reputation, their hushed whispers filling the air. Others exchanged uneasy glances but didn't dare to intervene. Jenkins shoved open the door to a small hearing room, dragging Malcolm inside. A handful of people had gathered, their faces reflecting a mix of curiosity and unease. The officer wasted no time, immediately launching into a string of exaggerated accusations. "Obstruction of justice, disturbing the peace, and attempted assault," he declared triumphantly. Malcolm listened calmly, his expression unreadable. The court clerk, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, glanced at him sympathetically. Jenkins, emboldened by the lack of immediate opposition, continued his rant with smug confidence. Malcolm, however, remained composed, knowing this was far from over. Judge Warren, a seasoned man with a calm demeanor, entered the hearing room, his robe trailing behind him. The murmurs in the room subsided as he took his seat at the bench, his sharp eyes scanning the people before him. "Officer Jenkins," Judge Warren began, his voice measured, "you've brought serious allegations against Mr. Gray." Jenkins straightened up, his confidence unshaken. "Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Gray interfered with an ongoing investigation." Malcolm sat quietly, his hands resting on the table, his posture unyielding yet respectful. "And what investigation would that be?" the judge asked, his tone laced with skepticism. Jenkins launched into an embellished story, painting himself as the dutiful officer thwarted by an unruly bystander. His words were laced with condescension, making it clear he believed his version would be accepted without question. As Jenkins spoke, Malcolm caught the disbelieving expressions of a few onlookers in the room. One young man in a suit exchanged glances with the court clerk, both visibly uneasy. Finally, Judge Warren raised a hand, cutting Jenkins off mid-sentence. "That's enough, officer." "Mr. Gray, do you have anything to say in your defense?" the judge asked, turning his attention to Malcolm. Malcolm rose from his seat, his movements deliberate and calm. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady, "there seems to be a grave misunderstanding here." Malcolm reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a slim, polished badge. The room fell silent as he held it up for everyone to see. "I am Malcolm Gray, the chief federal prosecutor for this district," he stated firmly, his tone unwavering. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom as the weight of his words sank in. Jenkins's face turned pale, his earlier bravado vanishing in an instant. Malcolm continued, addressing the judge directly. "Your Honor, I was on my way to court when I witnessed Officer Jenkins harassing a young man on the courthouse steps. When I intervened to de-escalate the situation, I was unjustly detained." The judge's eyebrows lifted slightly as he processed the revelation, his gaze shifting to Jenkins. "Officer Jenkins," Judge Warren said slowly, his tone carrying a sharp edge. "Is this true?" Jenkins stammered. I didn't know who he was, Your Honor. It was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Malcolm interjected, his voice calm but firm. "You used your authority to intimidate and detain without cause." The judge raised a hand to stop the exchange, his expression now stern. "Officer Jenkins, this is a serious matter," he said firmly. "I will require a full review of your conduct." Malcolm's composed demeanor never faltered as he addressed the court. "Justice is not just a concept we uphold. It is a principle we must live by. Today, that principle has been tested." Judge Warren leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Officer Jenkins, your actions today have cast a shadow over this courtroom and the principles it stands for." The judge turned to Malcolm, his tone softening slightly. "Mr. Gray, on behalf of this court, I extend my sincerest apologies for what you have endured." Malcolm nodded respectfully, his calm demeanor unwavering. Judge Warren continued, "All charges against you are hereby dismissed, and a formal inquiry into Officer Jenkins' behavior will begin immediately." A murmur spread through the room, some spectators nodding in agreement, others whispering about Jenkins' likely downfall. Jenkins, now visibly shaken, stumbled over his words. "Your Honor, I was just doing my job." The judge raised a hand to silence him. "This court will not tolerate abuses of power. You may step down." Jenkins lowered his head, the weight of his actions pressing heavily on him as he left the courtroom in disgrace. Outside, Malcolm stepped onto the courthouse steps, the air still humid, but charged with a sense of triumph. A small crowd had gathered, some clapping softly, others approaching to shake his hand and offer words of encouragement. Among them was a young man Malcolm recognized, the teenager Jenkins had harassed earlier. "Thank you, sir," the young man said, his voice filled with gratitude. Malcolm placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's not just about me, it's about standing up for what's right." As Malcolm walked away, he carried with him not just a personal victory, but a reminder of the greater fight for justice.